Alicia Jessop from The Athletic, covers sports business, and she joins us now on the consequences for all these networks. The cancellation of March Madness. What does CBS? What does Turner do? What does ESPN do without the NBA playoffs, the NBA finals? What does all of these networks do economically to move forward? All right, let's bring Alicia in and get some information on all that stuff as she joins us on the Boardwalk Honda hotline. Alicia, welcome. How are you?
Thank you. What a weird day.
Extremely weird. And more happens. I mean, the Masters got postponed, and I don't know when they're going to pick that up, but I mean, the draft, they might end up doing that. But March Madness is the biggest of big, right? I mean, of all the events, okay, you can hit the pause button on things, but to cancel the signature event of the college season, I mean, how stunning was that? I know you just got off the phone with some of the broadcasters of that. I mean, how stunning were some of the things that they told you about getting the information?
It was shocking. I think everyone saw this coming. So I spoke to Tracy Wilson on Wednesday when the announcement was made that the games were going to be played in empty arenas. And she was stunned by that news, but she could see it coming. And then when I spoke to her yesterday following the cancellation, she was again stunned. And I spoke to a good number of the reporters who were scheduled to call these games. Some went on the record, others wanted to be off the record, but the general reaction, and this is in the story on The Athletic, the general reaction was the same. Disappointment, sadness, a letdown, but also understanding that this was the action and response that the NCAA needed to take in this uncertain time. So wild, wild day.
No question, as now we know that there will be no NCAA tournament. Alicia, what about Turner, CBS, what do they do? I mean, people forget, like, boo-hoo, woe is them, but they put out, billions of dollars to host the NCAA tournament on TNT, CBS, True. I don't know if True still does it, but what happens to them?
Yeah, and this is, so I'm also a lawyer, and this really boils down to a legal question. Now, the contracts between all of these parties aren't public, but my instinct tells me that in the coming days, we will learn a little bit more about how these contracts are drafted. But there's so many questions as to who needs to pay who, if payment will be transferred, and what the trickle-down implications are for the rest of the college athletics ecosystem following this decision. So first, yes, you're correct. CBS et al. Are parties to a multi-billion-dollar contract with the NCAA to broadcast March Madness. For the NCAA, the payments it receives through that March Madness broadcasting contract account for the biggest source of its annual income. So last fiscal year was the first time in its history the NCAA generated income of over $1 billion. And the greatest source of that was money from these March Madness broadcasting contracts. The NCAA then takes that money and pushes it down to the rest of its member institutions. So we have a lot of things at play here. Like, thing one, are the advertisers who are going to purchase ad space, and ad space for the tournament was sold out as of February. Are they still on the hook to pay for that ad space based on the contracts? Is CBS on the hook to pay the NCAA even though the tournament is canceled? If they don't pay the NCAA, now the NCAA has a lot of money in its reserves, but that money has begun being depleted because of the numerous lawsuits it's defending. Will the NCAA be able to distribute as much money to member institutions? Many member institutions, especially at the smaller, lower level Division I, so your mid-majors, they rely on the money from the basketball fund to keep their athletics departments above the red. So this is a huge mess. And obviously, we haven't even begun talking about the ticket takers, the parking attendants who are also hurt by this.
Big time craziness in that situation. What about ESPN and their situation without the NBA? I mean, they had a window of I think I read, was it 16 regular season games on ABC and ESPN, and 44 playoff games coming up in the month of April and May that they don't know what to do with. I mean, and when you're replaying, ESPN News and SportsCenter, that essentially will start to take a hit into the bottom line, I imagine, at some point.
Absolutely. So it's a really challenging time for the media because how do you fill this airtime when you don't have the content you were expecting? And we're obviously practicing social distancing, so you've even seen some esports tournaments be canceled. But where I could see a lot of the programming going is towards esports streaming. Streamers can still compete in their bedrooms or wherever they are, but this is really an opportunity for these networks to begin tapping into the younger generations who aren't as avid of fans of traditional sports. So I could imagine ESPN using some of that airtime to show some really popular classic games, to dig into its E60 series and work to create some content on the fly there. So you're kind of moving, in a sense, to more of a Netflix model where you're creating really unique standalone content, and hopefully you have some of that stuff in the hopper, and maybe you're moving up release dates instead of running them during our typically slow months in the summer, which are your June, July, and August. So I can envision that happening, and also a greater focus on non-traditional sports that can be competed in without needing to be in somebody else's space.
Alicia, what's your opinion on how all the sports leagues handled it? So Mike and I have been talking about this all week, and on Monday, Mike predicted that it's going to take something drastic for drastic decisions to be made, meaning someone in the limelight, whether it's a player, a professional player, or a big-time celebrity, is going to have to contract this for decisions to be made. You fast forward to Wednesday night, and the NBA cancels or postpones, I should say, their regular season because of Rudy Gobert. So I ask you, if Rudy Gobert never contracted this, are we still talking about
probably
all
playing
these
in empty
decisions?
buildings, right?
Right.
Yeah, that's a great question. So if it wasn't going to be Rudy Gobert, it was going to be a different athlete. He was just the person to publicly come down with it first. But I think there's just so many unknowns with this virus, and that you're seeing the reaction that you're seeing globally because of those unknowns. And what's happening behind the scenes is the leagues and the teams, they're weighing their risks. And you're always facing the risk of a lawsuit. And it's like, if you don't take the action now, what are the risks on the other end? And because of the spaces that they're in, where in some cases you have 30, 40, 50,000 people in the world of MLS, if one person tests positive, then you're running the risk of infecting tens of thousands of people, and those people infect people. And what you're looking at is a massive class action lawsuit for negligence, and what are the costs associated with that? So I think what we're seeing, I know what we're seeing, is leagues acting out of an abundance of caution because there's no standard here. And with the law, what you're always looking for is a standard of best practice. And once the first league pulled the plug, so once the NBA pulled the plug, it basically sent a flare up to the rest of the leagues that if you don't act in the way that the NBA is acting and somebody contracts the virus in your game or at your venue, you are opening yourself up to massive legal liability in a way that we've never seen because we haven't experienced a virus like this in modern history and in the global world that we're living in. So really fascinating question.
Yeah, and the whole thing is just fascinating, and the unknown factor is huge. But I just asked that because I agree, it's just such a PR potential nightmare, and you're being safe rather than sorry, and you're trying to get ahead of it, although it was definitely reactive by the NBA making that decision after Gobert contracted it. How is it perceived, though, from your end, that a lot of schools and businesses are still open? Like, for example, high school basketball playoffs in our area, games are canceled, but these kids are in school today. And it's just that, and I'm not saying what's right or what's wrong. It's just confusing and unknown, like you said.
Yeah. So I think we have to remember that sport is what they say is a microcosm of society, and sport and entertainment are two of the most visible aspects of society. The likelihood that people were going to come down in wide numbers with the virus, we don't know what the likelihood of that is. I'm a professor at a university in California who is moving to completely online instruction, and it's moving its students off of campus. But we've had interaction with these students for about 72 hours after that decision was made. So I think everybody is just doing the best that they can, and they're trying to operate with very little information, with limited tests, with limited knowledge of what this disease or virus actually does, and trying to keep things safe and sane to the greatest of their ability, amidst all of those questions. So I think for schools, and again, I'm not a doctor, I'm a lawyer. I think on the school front, my guess would be that the administrators are looking at the data related to transmission of the virus and death rates and kind of weighing the risks a little different given the age groups of people in school versus a sports arena where you run the risk of having some of that older population in the stands who is impacted more heavily by this virus.
Alicia Jessop is our guest from The Athletic, sports writer, sports media business. Do you think there will be an uproar first that comes back, or will they be embraced for coming back first? I feel this is an interesting one. Like, does hockey say, you know what, we can get a jump on some popularity by being the first one that comes out? Like, do you think someone like that will be negatively looked at if someone just kind of like 2 weeks from now is like, you know what, we feel good, we're going to come back?
So one thing that struck me throughout this entire week is just what seems to be the information sharing and the collaboration, at least between the American sport leagues. So earlier in the week, the major sport leagues, save for the NFL, because it wasn't in season or coming close to season, issued a joint press release announcing protocols or strategies that they were going to adopt. So I think amongst the major sport leagues, you're going to see that collaboration continue where one of them is not going to restart the engine, if you will, before the rest who were in their traditional seasons would. And what I see happening, honestly, is I don't see any of them taking action to return to play until our government speaks on the issue. So I see us as a society moving.
We're only in this.
So sports is
situation.
canceled.
Would you agree then that we're only in this situation because the government didn't direct anybody what to do? And that's what my prediction was. Someone will only act when there's something to act on, because that's the way we work in this country. We only do something irrational when something irrational happens. So nobody directed these leagues what to do, so they had to police themselves. They had to govern themselves. And when the NBA got somebody in their league, that's when they set the tone. So I don't know if the NBA was this trailblazer other than they were the first one that got hit with it.
Yeah, and I don't want to get political because
Right.
there's so much unknown here. But I just think that's the issue with COVID-19 is there is so much unknown. So what are you supposed to do? And as a business owner, you have to work with your lawyers. You have to evaluate the risks. You have to assess what you know about those risks. And then in a landscape that is literally a complete unknown for anyone who is currently living on this universe, you have to determine what the next best steps are for your business. And so that's what we've seen the sport world do. But why I think we're not going to see sports come back until the government acts is the sporting industry has done all they can do to protect their athletes, their employees, and their customers, and they've shut down. Now it's time for our government to do its job and for health leaders to do their jobs and to conduct the research and start answering questions. And until questions are answered, I don't see business coming back to play. It's too risky.
Mm-hmm.
It's way too risky. So until this thing magically goes away or until our government and health officials, the CDC, tells us how to manage it, business is not going to go back.
Really good stuff. Interesting, as always. Alicia Jessop from The Athletic. And obviously very fluid. Everything keeps changing and happening. But these networks need something to put on television. They need to fill the time with something on ESPN and TNT and CBS and Turner and all of the sporting events that are now gone. The regional networks, that's another one. That's not even like, here locally, NBC Philadelphia, they fill up their whole schedule with Sixers, Flyers, Phillies games. They're not going to be on, for a while. What do they do with those nights? Are they in big trouble?
Well, think about the beat reporters. If you're a beat reporter, what are you doing? Somebody should give me a show. I can give you tons of content during this trying time.
All right. Well, we will bring you back a couple of weeks here, well, if we're still in this mess, to see how the impact financially has happened to all these people. But, Alicia, we appreciate a couple of minutes of your time.
Awesome. Thank you. Alicia
Jessop here on the Sports Bash. Really good stuff. By the way, you can follow her on Twitter for more, and she's really good at getting back and interacting. She is at Ruling Sports, She's a sports law professor at Pepperdine University, and she is a sports business writer for The Athletic.